Do you get notified?
Yeah.
All right, we are live. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning,
Paul.
How are we doing, Julian?
I am well, thank you. I am
Very
well. I think this time we're on at this stage, and I think everyone is out of lockdown. Is that right?
Pretty much. I'm not sure, not 100%, but yeah, it's looking pretty promising. We're joined today by Rob as well, which is a bit of an honour. Good morning, Rob.
Morning. You're welcome.
Rob would be able to give more insight into the Canberra market.
So you're in Canberra, Rob. You're out of lockdown at the moment.
No, well, I live in Wagga Wagga, but I run the business in Canberra, and I'll be able to travel back there from Monday. So
Monday. Okay. And obviously hospitality in Victoria is obviously a big leader, and so as we've gone through the evolution of all of these, Paul, we've had different stages of each state and the hospitality industry. So thoughts out as always to everybody that's back opening and trading, and we wish everyone all the best for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Good to see things getting back to, some sort of normality over the next few weeks, which is good to see.
Yeah.
And we've certainly seen a big pickup in the last few weeks, a lot more activity in the market. And that's led to, I guess, where today's come from. There's been lots of chatter in the groups about, people coming to market, selling their business, looking to move on. We just thought today might be a useful opportunity, whether you're watching this live or whether you're watching it afterwards, to have the chance to obviously get some insight from us about how we see businesses being valued and how we do it at GSE, and also to have the opportunity to ask some questions. So feel free, as we go through, post in the comments. If we can, we'll ask, whether it's live or afterwards, we'll try and come back and answer those questions for you. I guess from my side, I see a lot of things online about valuations that are just not correct. And, you never want to kind of go in the group and shut people down or put it across. But we just thought maybe this is a more positive way to give better context and insight into how businesses are valued and how they're changing hands. Yeah. Ultimately, we're transacting on quite a lot of sales across the country. So we do have good insight into the market. So that's really what today's about. So feel free, as we said, either now or after the event, post any comments you've got, and we'll either answer them live now or we'll come back to you.
The other thing too, Paul, I think this is what's going to happen. There'll be a lot of opportunity to buy businesses as well, to expand your business. So if obviously you're in operation and you want to look at expanding your business, and there'll be a lot of properties on the market, and there'll be a lot of businesses obviously coming, a lot of opportunities. So this is not only used for people that want to sell their own business, but if you're actually venturing out to buy a business for the first time, this will be really useful. What we go through.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I'm seeing a bit of it in Queensland. I'm seeing a fair few transactions in Queensland where people are taking the opportunity to expand.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, sorry, Rob, go on.
I was going to say the market's a funny thing, and it changes quite a lot. So you've got to be quite sort of sensitive to what's going on. And I've certainly seen in the Canberra market a big shift from buyers having the power to vendors. And so, yes, there are bargains out there, but you can also get a really good price for a business if you've got a solid appraisal and you've got a profitable business. There's a good opportunity for both buyers and sellers at the moment.
Absolutely, yeah, it is a fairly strong market for both sides. I think there's a perception at the moment that I've picked up on that vendors or people thinking of selling have the impression it's there's a lot of vultures out there, there's a lot of bargain hunters, and it's true, there are, but that's true of any time, and for me it's no different. But a good point you just made there, Rob, is that at the moment there is supply and demand. There's a shortage of good, properly priced, positioned businesses. So if you have a business like that that's come to market at the right price and it's a solid business, you stand as good a chance now, if not better, of getting a very good return on your sale.
That's right. I think there's a real diversity of buyers around at the moment. Yes, there are bargain hunters, but there are also people who are looking to change career, that have made some, done a lot of soul searching through lockdown and want to make a change. So there are different types of buyers out there. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. All right. Well, let's look at the overarching principle, or the way that most hospitality businesses change hands, is what's called on a multiple method. So there's as you look at business valuation methods, there's several different ways, but typically with hospitality, this it certainly is the way that majority of the market changes hands. So Rob, for people that don't know, how would you describe the multiple method?
I would sum it up that it is your business is worth a multiple of the income it can bring to a working owner.
Okay, so that's we're talking about EBITDA, so earnings before interest, tax, depreciation and amortization. So your net profit, basically, your annual net profit is then multiplied by a figure depending on, I guess, a number of different factors. And we won't go too far into the detail on that, but what's a few things that typically would affect the multiple?
Well, I'll take the opportunity that Julian disappeared to say probably the least.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, don't say least too much because otherwise it'll be off.
There are quite a lot of factors that can affect multiple, and I think it can be a lot to do with how saleable and how attractive the business is going to be. So, if your business is well automated and systemized, and there are a lot of processes in place, and buyers look at it and they can see that it's going to be manageable and easy to get into, it's probably got a bit of extra value to a business that doesn't.
Yeah. Okay. And we see. I mean, typically we talk about the range of multiple in hospitality being anywhere from 1 up to 3, maybe a bit more in a very strong market, but not that we've seen that for a while. But yeah, I guess what we try and always put across to people is that there's certain factors you've got control of that will help determine where you sit on that range of multiple at the current time. As you said, the lease is an extremely important part of that. The current market is obviously a big driver of where that multiple sits at the moment, but there are things that you can do, is even with the lease and with the business itself, to really increase where you sit. So if the range at the moment, just pulling numbers out the air, was between 1 and 2, there's things that you can do to make sure that you're closer to the 2 than the 1. And there's always going to be exceptions either side of that. We're talking about the average sales at this point. So as you said, with planning and preparation and making sure that you've got the business well organized before you come to market, and that's part of a good exit plan, that's naturally going to help on 2 levels. It's going to help you to make it easier to sell the business, but it's also going to help you drive that higher multiple. And that's something that, I know Julie and I have talked about a lot in the hub with systems and processes, even simple things like menu costings, recipe cards. If you're demonstrating to a buyer that all that's done, it's obviously going to help to drive the value.
So I think that's a really sorry guys, I had to move quickly, but I think that's a really important point though, because franchise industry's gone through a really, really tough time. So what I think that they provide your systems and processes. And so let's take out franchise fees and bad franchisees and so on. But what they provide is systems and processes. And I quite often talk to independent businesses about setting up like you're running a franchise business, so somebody can come in and turn the key and everything's done. So looking at the franchise system, that's the positive that you get out of a franchise system, not the negative side of it. But the positive side of it is to take that time and develop your systems and processes like it's a franchise business, because that's when you get a higher multiple on your business.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's for me, like the simplest way that I like to think about it is that all you're doing with the planning and getting the business ready for sale, the exit plan, is all about minimizing risk in the mind of the buyer or the eye of the buyer.
Yeah.
So it's the lower the risk, the higher the price. It's just a simple process that you go through. But I think that probably that whole preparation side of things is something that can really help you to drive that multiple. So Rob, that net profit, I know there's a few things that we do as part of the sales process that takes the P&L from zero or from the accountant that's basically produced for tax purposes. There's certain things that when you're preparing the valuation or when you're working out where the value of the business does based on the net profit, there's a process that we go through with creating an add back schedule. So do you want to just, for people that are not sure what that is or what that process looks like, do you want to just talk through that and what we do in that relation?
Yeah, sure. So when I'm doing an appraisal and creating an add back schedule, essentially add backs are expenses that would not survive the sale, or that they would either form part of the profit, so the owner's salary. It's important to mention you can probably only include one owner's salary. So if it's a husband and wife business, one of your salaries has to be left into the wage cost. But expenses that a buyer wouldn't incur would be included as add backs. So if you have loans or things like that you intend to pay off or won't, form part of the sale, then that can be put into profit or added onto the value of the business, as well as certain discretionary spending. And it can get a bit grey there. You've got to be a little bit careful with discretionary spending. Some things buyers will accept, and some things they'll think you're being a bit cheeky about. So you've got to be a little bit careful with discretionary spending. When I started appraising businesses, I had quite a generous view of this and got into trouble by, putting a few too many things in as add backs, and buyers didn't really accept that. So, but essentially, expenses that you're incurring that could be either viewed as income to you or will not transfer to a buyer of the business can be
okay.
That will help add to the value of the business.
So we're looking to adjust the profit to get to a level that, if I was to buy the business from you, for example, and work there full time as an owner, this is what I could expect to earn. And once we've got that figure, then we're multiplying that by the current industry or current market multiple, and that is going to give us it's going to give us a range of where the value might be.
Yeah.
Okay.
And where you sit the business in that range of multiples depends on, as you know, quite a lot of things. But I think it's important to start with your own expectation and how long you expect the process to take, I suppose. And sales, as you know, they often are a function of time. And so if you want something at the top end of the multiple, then yes, there's certain steps you can put in place to make sure you can get that. But it can take a little bit longer to find the right buyer. You might need to sort of go through a few different buyers before you can get the price that you want.
Yeah. And I know you touched on it briefly before as Julian just stepped away for a moment, but perhaps Julian could give some insight into one of the bigger drivers of value of the business is the lease. And I know that's something that we always talk about, but looking at the adjusted EBITDA and the profit and the multiple and all that is very important. But if the lease isn't where it should be, all of that goes out the window. You're talking about literally, if there's some clauses in a particular lease, you can forget the financials because it's going to more than halve the value of the business. So, Julian, if you're looking from the perspective of somebody watching this that's looking to sell, what around the lease, what should they be doing as part of the first part of the sales process?
Yeah. So usually, as we've spoken before, is a lot of people, buy a business or, have a lease, they built the business and have a lease and just really don't look at it again for a fair while. It's quite common. The first thing you need to do is obviously get that lease and understand some of the mechanisms. And whilst in a lease, the rent figure is extremely important, obviously, because it underpins some of your benchmarking, but there are other aspects that you need to look at. So I would go through and look at some key items. So, what's your gross rent? So, your base rent plus outgoings and any marketing fees. So, what your monthly figure actually is and get familiar with that. What does that rent increase every 12 months on the anniversary? And that can range anything from usually CPI up to 5% in shopping centres. So that's a mechanism you need to understand. Term is probably, what you guys would probably see as one of the most key important thing is how long left on the lease. It makes it, the value of the lease, will obviously decrease, or the value of the business will decrease if there's not enough time left on it. a buyer needs to be able to come in and say, how am I going to get return on my investment if I've only got a couple of years left? I'll need I'll need a period of time to get my money back and then make money. So usually, I would sort of look at that, 3, 4, 5 years would be minimum that you would want to be able to purchase. Any options on a lease. So that's really, really important. Any options to be able to take up. And a lot of the time I've seen before that people don't realize, obviously you've got to actually accept that option and take up that option, which means it needs to be done in writing. It's generally 6 months before expiry, but that can vary, and you need to ensure you know those dates.
Yeah, you definitely need to have those in the calendar. Actually, just to jump in there, Julian, one thing I've noticed recently with a couple of New South Wales transactions is that when we've gone into the preparation stage with the lease hasn't been registered. Now, a lot of people don't realise that's even a thing. So I just wanted to add that's something that you need to check when you dig that and dust that lease off. You need to make sure that it's registered, because that process, as simple as it is, if it hasn't been executed or done when you took the lease on, it can take 5, 6, 8, 10 weeks sometimes to go through. And if that's something that only comes to light once you've got a buyer, then it can be an issue. If the business has gone under offer, it's gone to the solicitors, and all of a sudden you find out the lease isn't registered and the purchaser's solicitor is insisting it's registered, that's just slowed your sale down by a number of weeks. And time in that position, I've always found is your enemy. Once you get somebody engaged and you get them interested, you've got to push that sale through quickly. Otherwise, they start getting buyer's remorse, they have second thoughts, the logic kicks in, and the whole thing, as I know Rob's had the experience with this, it's it can be very painful.
I think that another mistake that you can fall into, and something I deal with buyers in the preparation stage, Paul, is that they think that they should approach the landlord if there are issues on the lease that need to be sorted out. So if their lease is coming up or what have you, they think we'll find a buyer and they can negotiate a new lease, and that's a terrible idea. It's
a terrible idea.
It is. I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's definitely a misconception that it's okay, we'll just let the buyer negotiate with the landlord. And in my experience, as soon as the buyer and the landlord start talking, that's when your problems begin. You need to control that.
You need to control that. 100%. Well, really, and Paul, really good point. You need to control that. So, if there isn't enough time left on your lease, or you're going through a renewal. And the other thing too is, we've certainly read a fair few comments in the groups, Paul, over the time about people concerned about signing a lease renewal and then selling it straight away. As you said, if the documents are executed, the lease are registered, sell it. Then generally what you will need to do is ensure that there's an assignment clause or a franchise clause within the lease that allows you to sell it. So, if that's in there and it's an easy transaction, then renegotiate your lease yourself. Don't get the buyer involved at all, because they don't want to know about it. It just rocks the cart.
It's also, as well, when you talk about control, Julian, if you're telling a buyer that this is an assignment of the lease, it's about the buyer proving themselves to the landlord, not negotiating with the landlord to get better terms. It's a nightmare. So a landlord generally can't withhold the assignment of the lease unless there's some significant areas of concern. And those two areas really come back to two things: financial capacity and business experience. They're the two things that a landlord will want to look at. And so, we've talked before, Paul, about, when you're buying a business, do a business plan. Take the time to write a business plan with your own goals, financial goals, and do a financial plan to understand, your working capital, and then you can afford the liability. Once you provide that to the landlord, then assignment becomes quite easy, to be honest. The landlord just wants to make sure that you can run the business and you can pay the rent.
It is. Again, it comes back to preparation, and that's
preparation is huge.
It's all on the buyer side. Once you've got your buyer, it doesn't matter what you feel about the deal, and the buyer might be extremely happy with the deal, and you guys have got it all sorted. But if you don't get the landlord across the line, then of course that's an issue. So that preparation side, you need to be prepared to help your buyer to get through after they've made the offer, to get through the appraisal.
So I think a common thing from a landlord's perspective, Paul, businesses sell, right? Businesses sell all the time. It's not new to a landlord that a business sells. So don't hide from the landlord and then try and sneak things through, or, think that the landlord's just going to squash it. I think, we quite often talk about having a good relationship with an agent or a landlord and having open lines of communication. And this is just part of the process.
Yeah,
Hey guys,
I think if you have that conversation early on, you can actually ask them outright, what information do you want from the buyer? I mean, Rob will know, like, we deal on lots of different things. Different landlords focus on different things. Some are not even that worried about the experience. They're more worried about the financials. Have you got property?
Correct.
Are you going to put down a bond? What have you got in the bank? What assets do you hold? Others are more concerned with the experience, thinking, well, it's no good you having that money if you can't operate this business. So having a conversation early on is definitely a good way to gauge what information, and thinking back to what information you provided when you came into the property, what did you have to give the landlord? That's always a good way to kind of balance out and work out what they're going to require. But just going back to, like, staying on track with valuation and from the seller perspective, Julian, you mentioned their terms. So let's say, for example, somebody watching this has got a short term at the front end of their lease and an option, and maybe they want to kind of strengthen it up for the sale. What can be done legally and with the landlord to kind of improve that situation for the sales process?
So in terms of term, in terms of length on lease,
length of term,
So I mean, you can certainly go to a landlord or an agent and say that you want to negotiate a further term on the lease, and renegotiate effectively your lease. All it is effectively they surrender the existing lease and they implement a new lease, or they can vary the existing lease. So they may vary the existing lease by an expiry date and push it out another 12 months or 2 years. So, I think that conversation comes back to what you're saying, Paul, about being honest about it, and really just going to the landlord to saying that you need further time, to recoup your investment. That discussion sometimes, the landlord can have a little bit more power in that, because what's the incentive for them to actually renegotiate mid-term, because they've already banked that money in their mind. But if the business mechanism, so if all the benchmarks are okay, Paul, and the actual rent is not out of control, then extending the lease another 2 years, which will more likely be at the passing rent on expiry, it's a good idea. It's obviously gives you an asset, a further asset to sell. So I think we found the variation.
The variation works quite well because it's a fairly straightforward process, and that you can get that done relatively cheaply. But one thing I've noticed, and I don't know whether you've had experience with this, but the lending criteria of a lot of banks changed a while back. And now they focus on the front end term of a lease. So if you've got a lease that's, say, a 5x5, and you've only got 1 year left, and then the 5-year option. If you're looking to go for finance, the bank will only consider the 1 year. Although, we all know that legally, if you exercise your option in the right time frame, the landlord is required to give you that option. The banks and lending institutions are looking at those terms differently. So in that situation, would you suggest a variation to the front term of the lease as opposed to an additional option, or how would you best get around that?
If I was in that term, so if I only had, if I came up and I had 12 months left and I had a 5-year option, and it was causing obviously an issue with the sale and any finance of the likes, I would definitely talk to them about extending the lease a few years and pushing out the extension of the option. So all terms of the lease effectively stay the same. It's just an extension on the expiry date. As you said, it's a lot simpler to actually negotiate that than trying to renegotiate no bank guarantees, no personal guarantees. It becomes complex, and the landlord will generally say we'll see you in 12 months. So you're right. I would look at doing that and just moving out the option date, effectively moving it and allowing the banks to be able to assess it on a 3-year term rather than 1 year and the likes. But that, it becomes about a real honesty communication with the landlord, to be honest. And that's, you don't want to be fighting with your landlord even before the sale, guys. Like, I've been through it personally myself. It doesn't end pretty. So
no, you need to work together. Ultimately,
have to work together. And Paul, that means paying your rent on time. I've got to be honest. It means paying your rent on time. It means You know,
well,
clear
the
communications.
assignment can be refused if your rent's not paid on
in
time.
arrears, yeah.
You're effectively in default of the lease, which means that the landlord can refuse the assignment on those bases. So you have
it's
to have that good
sometimes
relationship.
worth getting some advice on it, though. I think landlords can sometimes be a little bit greedy. They can take advantage of the situation. I mean, I've got a client at the moment who is coming to the end of their lease. They've got an option, and so we discussed it. And they went to the landlord and said, "Can we have a brand new lease?" And the landlord said, "Yeah, that's fine. There will be an increase. Here's what it will be." And they showed it to me. I said, that looks fine. But then the landlord came back and said, "My solicitor said, because you're breaking the lease, we're going to apply the rental increases that you would otherwise experience on the existing lease onto the top of that." And that was despite having an increase to the rent anyway. So they're pushing back.
Hey, when we teach negotiation skills, is the person with the most time pressure has the weaker hand. It's just a fact of negotiation. It doesn't matter how you dress it up, Rob, in terms of if someone comes to a landlord and says, "I want an early renewal," well, they've already banked that money, right? In their brain, they've already banked it and all their budgets and everything. So they're not going to go backwards. And so you're going to them asking for something. That's why depending on your benchmarking and how much rent you're paying, it may not be the best time to negotiate that. But if your rent is in control, then you're going to need to accept the increases, Rob. Like you generally need to do that to get that through. This is a business with a cost of occupancy of around sort of 4%. So it's so you've got the margin.
A bit of room for movement. Yeah.
It's when it's out of control that it's not the best time. You're under pressure. The landlord's not under pressure.
And I guess doing it in the preparation stage is much better than doing it while you're on the market when you're
100%. Yeah. That's good. So, all right. Well, thank you, Julian. So, I mean, key takeaways there are: if you haven't looked at your lease, you're not familiar with the terms, then dig it out, go through it, make sure there's nothing in there that's going to affect the sale, and use the time early on, because these things probably take longer than anything else. The lease, getting the legals done, and all of those changes made if required. So get that done early on, and then also, bear in mind that regardless whether you're dealing with it or whether you've got a broker, you need to know the content of that lease, because you're going to get questioned about it. It's
100%.
important. Any smart buyer is going to focus on the lease more than anything else in the early stages. So that without that being where it needs to be, it's definitely going to affect the sale. So, Rob, I know when we were speaking just before we came on, we talked about emotion, and you mentioned sort of one of the big tips for the sales process, and in particular, as we're talking about today, for the appraisal and the valuation of your business, is that you need to remove emotion from it. And it's easier said than done. But do you want to just talk us through what, from the valuation side of things, what do you mean when you suggest to people that they need to remove emotion?
From an appraisal point of view, look, there's definitely a phenomenon that I picked up that people work very hard to build a business. They're very proud of it. And then when it comes time to sell, they can very much inflate the value in their own mind of what the business is worth. And that can lead to some prickly conversations when you're approached as a broker. You give an appraisal and you can't agree on the value. And so it's really important that you give as much information and to show them, this is what the market's doing, this is what it's paying. And we all know what happens if you take a business to market overvalued. It just sits there. And, it's easy to sometimes just think, well, we'll give it a go. But that's a mistake as well, I believe, because
I think we've all learned from that one with our own experiences.
Yeah, it's a big mistake. When you first come to market, that's when you get the most attention. It's when people look at you, and if you're overpriced and the market moves on and ignores you, it's really hard to then get back to where you need to be. So I think removing emotion from the process is really important. Your business is worth what the market's going to pay, and you can increase the value. You can, to an extent, you can increase the saleability to an extent, but you can't force the market to pay you what you want.
Yes, that's a very good point. And I think that's the key to, the approach with our appraisals and the approach of the tools that we've got inside the hub and inside the 6 Steps program. They're all geared around showing you where the market value is, but also highlighting where the areas are that you can pull those levers and actually increase the value. There's a number of factors that you have got control over that will increase the value significantly. So I think it's a great point, like removing the emotion to the point where you take a view, well, this is where the market sees the value, and it's important that value or the figure that you've got, that number you've got in mind, that you don't just rule that out, but you look at it and say, okay, well, there's the market value. There's where the market sees where my business is worth. That's reality. That's fact. We can't do much about that. Here's what I want. And then in between that, what can I do to increase the value? And I know that's really what we're all quite passionate about helping people with. Instead of just listing it for a figure that you need to get, and we get that all the time. I know, Rob, you get that as much as I do, where you say to people when they talk to you about what their expectation is, that you say, well, how have you come up with that number? Why have you picked that number? And usually it comes down to, well, that's what we need, because by the time we've paid this and this, and I need to do this for the kids, and we want to go on holiday, well, that's we're not discounting that method to a degree, providing you're not listing on that basis. If that's the figure you've decided you need to sell for, or a target figure you want to get, that's actually a really positive thing in my mind. It's more about then the gap, like the profit and the value gap between those two, if there is one between those figures. So it is difficult with emotion. It is, we've all had our own businesses, and we do still run our own businesses, and they are like, they're almost like your children.
You're both your child,
I think the other thing about emotion as well is that, if you're going to sell your business yourself, you've got to expect buyers to ask sort of challenging questions that can make you feel a little bit sort of, and they're just normal questions. Anybody's going to ask that stuff, Buyers are going to look at your business very differently to the way that you look at it. I mean, vendors often say, it's great, you can do this, you can do that, you can do the other, and buyers just have a completely different perspective, as you know.
Yeah, it is very true. That whole inspection thing and the feedback, it's much, and that's why it's easy for us if we're operating as brokers. If I show you a property and you tell me it looks disgusting, you don't like the color, blah blah, all these, you come through the negatives, then as a broker, my eyes are lighting up, and it's the green light for me to start selling, because I now know what your objections are and I can overcome them. But as the business owner, if someone's telling you, this, I had this conversation recently, so you might as well just tell me my children are ugly while you're at it, because you're that involved, and it is, you do get emotional about it. So throughout the entire process, and in particular the early stages, you do as much as it's easy. It's not a throwaway comment. It's easy for us to say remove emotion, but you have to, I think, be quite conscious to do that and not get drawn in.
The extent, Paul, as well, when it comes to follow up, people can be a bit like, well, did you follow up with that buyer? No, I didn't. Well, if they were interested, they'd come to me, but you have to follow up.
Yeah. I know that's definitely one of the biggest differences I talk to people about between what we do as brokers and the 6 steps to sale when people are selling on their own with our support. Whereas as a broker, the follow-up is almost relentless, to the point where I'll keep calling you or messaging you until you tell me you're not interested. And once you tell me you're not interested, then I'm going to find a solution to why you're not interested. So it is, and it's very difficult to do sometimes when you're running a business yourself and you've got 101 other things going on. But it's crucial that you get that follow up.
Yeah, and we talk about it, in any negotiation, even if it's a lease negotiation, which, really just comes back to a rate per square meter at the end of the day. They're the actual facts. The rest of the emotion gets taken out of it. It's a rate and it's a size of a box. And so, not everyone has the skill set to negotiate a favourable outcome. So it is a very old profession, as we all know. And so that's why you go get a business broker. That's why you go get a professional, because that's the difference between $10,000, $20,000 or a quick sale or a slow sale. And all that money is relative, Paul and Rob. Like, you can put a business on the market and cost yourself 6 months of time You know, money
Yeah.
now is much better than money, you know, down the track that probably wasn't what you thought you were going to get anyway. So, you know, I think, you know, hiring a great brokerage will pay for itself, you know.
Yeah, there's, you
100%.
know, there's no cost to it.
There's no cost. It's a cost neutral
covers its-
exercise.
Yeah,
you know,
you get the right one, definitely.
Same as lease negotiation.
Yep.
You know, you see it all the time.
It's really genuinely, it's an exercise in getting more money.
More money, yeah.
So
worse.
It is,
yeah. And we all see that. We all see that.
Hmm.
You know?
All right, perfect. Well, I'm going to put you both on the spot now. So thinking through, because I'm conscious of time, we'll just wrap things up. But thinking about valuation and people that are looking to work out what the value of their business is worth, what's the number one or one most important thing that you would suggest for people to do? Julian?
Yeah, my thing would just be lease. I'll go down the lease path. Is that, you know, to understand how long you have left on your lease, what your gross rent is per annum, you know, back to a monthly rate, any options available. So mine would be to understand the basic terms of the lease and familiarize yourself with that. That's the most important.
Perfect. Okay. Rob, what about yourself?
It's the financials, Paul. If you're going to sell your business based on what it can, on its profit, that has to be profit on paper. It can't be intangible. It can't be cash. It can't be, you know, all those things. It has to be demonstrable and on paper. Yep.
Okay, great. And mine comes back to just, I mean, it encompasses both the points that you guys have made just around preparation. Like really put the time in at the front end. It might seem like a chore, but the more work you do in the preparation stage, the easier the selling stage gets. Don't rush to market. Come to market when the price is right for the market and for you. And you've got, as you said, the lease is all organised, the financials are all organised. Everything's laid out so you can deal with inquiries quickly, because once you get inquiries, it's all about momentum and keeping the deal moving. So the preparation stage for me is probably planning and preparation is crucial to getting the result you need.
100%. And even 100%.
Fantastic. All right. Well, hopefully, you know, if you're watching this and you've got questions about that, feel free. If you don't want to post in the comments below, just feel free to reach out to any of us directly. We're happy to help out or answer any questions you might have. Otherwise, post in the comments below and we'll come back to you. And we've got plenty of resources. If this is something you're looking to do, regardless of, you know, what the budget is or how you want to do it, if you want to just get the resources, you can join the GSE Hub, where you'll find all of the tools that we use in GSE to do everything you need to do in relation to the sale. Or we can obviously look at the 6 steps to sale. We have an appraisal service where Rob and I will be able to actually do an appraisal of your business for you if you want it all done for you. And of course, that's the front part of our brokerage service as well, if you want to have a chat about that. So plenty of ways that we can help if you need it. Otherwise, feel free just to ask questions in the comments below.
Yeah.
Perfect. Good stuff. All right, Rob, thank you for joining us. Always good to get your insight on these things and hopefully become a more regular guest now. And Julian, always
definitely.
good to see you. Good to catch up. All right.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
See you soon.
Thanks, Julian.
Thanks, guys.